Hello and welcome back to Story of the Day. We are picking up with Casper, Prince of Cats, and we are on the chapter, or partway through the chapter, Women and Children First. But still the boat could not be lowered. One of the crew was slicing away at the rope with his knife, cursing as he did so, and cursing even louder when he dropped his knife into the sea below. There were several lifeboats in the water already, rowing away from the Titanic. I glanced towards the stern and saw it was a great deal higher than it had been before. I could feel the great ship setting even lower into the sea. I caught Lizabeth's eye. She was willing me to do it, and do it now. I knew that if I had left it any longer, it may well be too late. I would show her there and then that I meant to keep my promise if I could. I turned to Mr. Stanton beside me. "I'm going to get Casper," I said. "I shan't be long." He shouted after me to come back, but I ignored him. By now the decks were crowded with men, all of them corralled by the crew, who had made a human cordon to keep back the last of the women and children who were being helped into the boats. But there was no pushing, no shoving. I saw among the dozens of my fellow stokers, most of them black with coal dust, and all of them unnaturally quiet. As I pushed my way through them to get back down below, one of them called at me. "You should be in one of the boats, Johnny lad. You're only a slip of a boy. You're young enough. You've got the right." The gangway was packed with passengers trying to make their way up on the deck, some of them older and more infirm, still in their nightgowns. One of the sailors who was trying to help them tried to stop me going down. "You can't go down there. There's water coming in everywhere. The whole ship's flooding fast." I dodged past him. "Idiot," he yelled after me. "You go down there again and you won't get back up." I ran on. After losing my way in the warren of corridors, I reached the right corridor on deck C, and I knew the sailor had been right. The sea water was ankle deep and rising all the time. And once I opened the doors to number 52, I saw the carpets were already under water. I looked around me frantically for Casper, but I couldn't see him. Not anywhere at first. It was Casper himself who told me where he was, yowling at me from the top of the wardrobe. I looked around for the picnic basket to carry him in, but I couldn't find it. I reached up and took him off the wardrobe and held him tight, but then, as I went out, I had the presence of mind to snatch a blanket off the nearest bed. All the way back up the corridor, I was wrapping Casper up in the blanket, not against the cold, but to stop him clawing me, for I knew that even if he wasn't frightened now, he soon would be. But as I ran back down the corridor, I was beginning to realise that the blanket had another, much more essential role too. If no luggage was being allowed on the boats, I reasoned they would hardly accept a cat. This is why, by the time I got back on deck, again Casper was hidden, deep inside the blanket, and now he was beginning to yowl. "None of your fuss, please, Casper," I whispered to him. "Quiet now, stay quiet. Your life could depend on it." I pushed my way through the stokers, ducked under the cordon of crewmen, and saw to my great relief that the lifeboat was still hanging there. But then I found my way suddenly blocked by an officer in a peaked cap who grabbed me by the shoulder. "No, you don't, lad. No men allowed in boats until all the women and children are loaded," he said. "I can't let you on. I can't let you pass." "He's not a man," someone shouted from me. "He's only a kid, can't you see?" All around me the stokers were suddenly clamouring at him to let me through, and they began pushing angrily against the ring of sailors, desperately trying to hold him back. I could see the officer was taken by surprise at the sudden rage of the crowd, and that he was hesitating. I saw my chance. "I'm not going on the boat," I told him. "I just went to fetch a blanket. It's for a child, a friend of mine. She'll freeze to death out there without it." I don't think he'd have let me through if Mr. Stanton hadn't come up at that moment and vouched for me. "It's all right. He's my son," he said to the officer, "and the blanket's for his sister." I was through. With Mr. Stanton holding me fast around the waist, I leaned across and handed the blanket, and then miraculously silent Casper into Mrs. Stanton's outstretched arms. "Be careful," I told her as meaningfully as I could, as if she was taking it from me that Casper was inside the blanket. She hugged it to her and sat down again in the boat. I could see, from the way Elizabeth was smiling up at me, she knew too. Distress rockets were fired up into the sky, lighting the ocean all around us, lighting too the scattering of little white boats out on the open sea, each of them crammed with women and children. And there's the picture. I remember thinking how extraordinarily beautiful it all was, and wondering how something so terrible could be so beautiful. On board of us, on board behind us, the band played on, as Elizabeth's boat was finally lowered into the water. Mr. Stanton and I stood side by side and watched from the railings as it was rowed slowly away. "That was a fine and noble thing you did, Johnny," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "God will guard them, I know it. And, for us, there'll be a boat along soon enough to take us off." Mr. Lightoller says they've seen the lights of a ship not 5 miles away. The Carpathia. She'll be on her way. They'll see these rockets for sure. They'll be alongside us soon enough. Meanwhile, I think you should help with the women and children, don't you? That was how we busied ourselves for the next hour or so, passing the women and children into the boats. I marvel now, when I think of it, at the courage I witnessed around me that night. I saw one American lady waiting to get into the boat with her elderly sister, but she was told no, there was no room. She didn't object, or protest in any way, but merely stepped back and said, "Never mind, I will get on a later boat." I never saw her again. I saw no man ever try and push his way onto the boats. To a man they accepted it was perfectly right and proper for women and children to go first. I heard later that some of the men on the starboard side of the ship had tried to rush on one of the lifeboats, and shots had been fired over their heads to drive them back, but I never saw it with my own eyes. There were many heroes that night, but if there was one I remember best, it was Mr. Lightoller. He was everywhere, quietly ensuring the safe loading and launching of boats, picking out the seamen to row each one. I can hear his voice now echoing in my head. "Lower away there, lower away. Are there any more women? Are there any more women?" And one of the waiting men answered back to him, I remember, "No more women, officer. There's plenty of men, though, but I don't see plenty of boats." It was something every one of us had now come to realise, that there were hardly any boats left to take the rest of us off, and that many of the lifeboats that remained could not now be launched because of the severe list of the ship. When I saw the seawater washing over the bow and rushing down the deck towards us, I knew that our chances of survival were fading fast. Like so many, I scanned the horizon desperately for the lights of another boat. We were all aware by now that she was the only ship close enough to come to our rescue, but there were no lights to be seen. The Titanic was sinking fast, and we knew now we were going to go down with her. With every minute that passed now, the list to port was telling us that the end was near. The deck was at such an angle that it was well nigh impossible to keep our footing. We heard Mr. Lightoller's voice ringing out, "All passengers onto the starboard side." So that's where Mr. Stanton and I went, slipping and sliding, clutching at each other for support, until we reached the rail of the starboard side and clung on. Here we looked out at the sea and waited silently for our end. There was nothing more to be done. I should like to say, Mr. Stanton said, his hand resting on my shoulder, that if I am to die tonight, and I cannot die of my family, then I'd rather die in your company than any other. You are a fine young man, Johnny Trot." "Will the sea be cold?" I asked him. "I fear so," he replied. "But don't worry, that's all to the good. It will be over very quickly for the both of us." And tomorrow we will pick up with the chapter. Good luck, and God bless you.